today. We're going to go to House Bill 3422 and call Representative Weidner, please. Mr. Schmidt will give a brief explanation.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, House Bill 3422 creates the crime of drug-induced homicide. It mandates a sentence for delivery of controlled substance that leads to the death of another to be at least 20 years prison if it was for consideration. It mandates a sentence of 12 years if controlled substance was delivered for no consideration. It creates the crime of drug-induced assault. It creates crime of drug-induced assault where controlled substance causes serious physical injury. It mandates presumptive sentence of 12 years prison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee members, State Representative Jim Weidner, House District 24, serving Yamhill County and some of Washington County. I'd like to thank you for hearing this bill today and giving us a shot at coming down a little harder on some of the drug trafficking trade that transpires through the state of Oregon, Washington, and California along the I-5 corridor. This bill came about when we met with Chris Gilbertson, the High-Density Drug Trafficking Area Director, in January. We asked his opinion on what legislative action would make Oregon communities safer. He said, besides more state troopers and more city police, I would like to see us implement the state version of the Len Bias Law. During the first days of this session, I was speaking with Rep. Barton, who had also thought of drafting legislation regarding a state version of the Len Bias Law. And what you see before you is a fruition of many conversations and work sessions that we had with different groups. Currently, when drug dealers sell their products that result in an overdose where there's sufficient suspicion that they have intimate knowledge regarding the DTO or OR drug trafficking organization, the state threatens to invoke the federal Len Bias Law. Unfortunately, it is well known to both these drug trafficking organizations and their defense attorneys that most of the time the federal threshold isn't met to invoke federal courts, agents, and prosecutors. The federal Len Bias Law is only used 12 times per year across the nation. When we made pseudoephedrine a prescription only in the state of Oregon, we did a great job in reducing the amount of labs operating in the state. But the demand remained very high. This caused the MDTOs, or the Mexican drug trafficking organizations, to fill the void with cheap meth and increase a very potent black tar heroin. This caused a spike in heroin usage in Oregon and has resulted in numerous overdoses. Our bill here will still allow prosecution discretion when dealing with overdose to rule them accidental drug-induced assaults or drug-induced homicide. The latter of the two will be rarely invoked, according to the DA, Doug Harkelgrove, who represents the Association of District Attorneys. He predicts that less than one per year will fall under the state version of the Len Bias Law and is writing a minimal fiscal to the DA's association. The main reason for this bill is to create an atmosphere of compelled cooperation for getting the drug deals to speak about their DTO connections, so we can establish a chain of evidence to prosecute these massive organizations that threat of 20 years or $370,000, $75,000 is often sufficient to get the drug dealer to cooperate with the authorities. By including language of presumptive sentencing and with the judge's final authority to reduce the sentence by ordering downward departure within the sentencing guidelines, we anticipate keeping the fiscal impact low and the threat assessment to the drug dealers high. I know many of you understand the importance of this bill, and I appreciate the bipartisan support of our 10 co-sponsors, and it was a pleasure working across the aisle with Rep. Barton to give the tool to our law enforcement and DAs who make our communities safer.
Thank you. Any questions for Representative Weidner? Thank you. Mr. Jeffers, please. A work session on House Bill 3422. Chris Gibson, please.
Chairman Barker and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to testify in support of House Bill 3422, which establishes the crimes of drug-induced homicide and drug-induced assault. My name is Chris Gibson. I'm appearing before you today in my capacity as Vice President of the Oregon Narcotics Enforcement Association, also known as ONEA. I begin by telling you that the ONEA Board supports the passage of House Bill 3422. According to information received from the Oregon Medical Examiner's Office and reported in the Oregon High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Program's annual threat assessments and many other documents, methamphetamine and heroin-related deaths in Oregon have risen steadily since 2001. Between 2010 and 2011, overall drug-related fatalities rose 20%, many of which were the result of overdose. Deaths related to heroin use reflected the highest number of fatalities, increasing 59% from 90 to a total of 143. The second highest number of deaths was related to methamphetamine, which totaled 107 in 2011. Unlawfully obtained and used prescription medications were likely responsible for countless other deaths that have not yet been reported. In every case, there was an individual or organization that was responsible for supplying the drugs that caused the deaths of each of those Oregon residents. House Bill 3422 provides clearly defined penalties that would hold those individuals and drug trafficking organizations accountable for those unnecessary deaths. House Bill 3422 also provides a useful tool for law enforcement officers in the state of Oregon called to the scene of those deaths and who are responsible for investigating the cause. Law enforcement officers in Oregon have recently come to rely upon a federal statute when investigating these cases. 21 U.S.C. 841, which imposes a minimum mandatory penalty of 20 years imprisonment, maximum is life and a $10 million fine if the use of those controlled substances delivered results in the death or serious injury of another person. The threat of those enhanced penalties has proven to be a successful tool when obtaining information on sources of the supplies of those drugs by drug traffickers. Local law enforcement task forces have been relying on the federal, what's known as the Len Bias sentencing enhancement provision during overdose investigations with a lot of success. They have found that sources are much more willing to provide information when a substantial minimum mandatory sentence is hanging over their heads. As a result, a number of highly active drug trafficking organizations have been identified and dismantled in very short amounts of time. While the U.S. Attorney's Office has been very good about applying federal law to these cases, there is always the chance that a priority shift could occur, so it would be nice to have the ability to put the decision-making into the hands of district attorneys. That's what House Bill 3422 would effectively do. Perhaps more importantly, and through its provisions that hold drug dealers more accountable for the most disastrous effect of drug trafficking, House Bill 3422 enables the state, on behalf of the families of the victims, to bring closure to what is an unavoidable, unnecessary, and often undignified loss of human life. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? This has a subsequent referral away from me, so.